Modern art. Okay, so this one's a little weird in that, when we say modern now, we mean today, we mean contemporary. So for us, this would be 2025. But at the time, that's how they used it. We're the moderns, but then it's stuck. So when we refer to the modern art, especially the high moderns, is what people like to talk about. The people at the pinnacle of this art form. Then what we really mean are from around the 1920s, pretty much. So it goes a little bit before that. So into the 1880s or so, into up to really before 1920 or so, up through World War One, between the wars, but usually after World War Two, people will start using different terms, and so they'll say postmodern or something like that. So it becomes difficult to talk about, and it depends on which art form you're in. But broadly speaking, so not just painting art, but literary art, architecture, pretty much everything. Modernists like complexity, they like fragmentation. So we're about to talk about Picasso, but before we get to Picasso, if we just switch to a different, we're not covering this, I'm not covering this in the screencast, but let's think about literature for a second. And James Joyce is really popular in this time. So in James Joyce, we kind of know how this works, but mostly through film, and it's really before it gets to film in America, it's copied by the great writer William Faulkner. And so if we take a novel like The Sound and the Fury, it's a different narrative presentation than what happened before. And so he gets this idea from Joyce, and from it's in circulation at the time, the idea. And so in a typical Faulkner novel, something awful happened a long time ago. And instead of having one narrator narrate the whole novel, now we're going to have a bunch of different narrators, and one of them is and you cannot rely on this person. Says things that this person is lying. Another one was a former slave in the household, so seems to be things that she wants to say, but then not fully reveal. And then there's a mentally handicapped narrator, and so that's how he's narrating his particular chapter. So, and this awful thing that happened a long time ago is never stated explicitly in any way that you can be sure of. So you can't know. And then critics later on, so especially after World War II, critics, the people who are going to write about this art, love it. Right? And why do they love it? Because you can talk nonstop about it, because because there's so many facets of it. So in the case of Faulkner, for example, since you can't know, then also you can write pretty much whatever. You can come up with all sorts of theories about it, publish, hopefully get you a professorship somewhere, and so on. But that complexity, people use the word complexity. You can't have certainty, and people like that. Our critics like that anyway. So we're just because it's visual, it's easier to talk about with paintings. So we get to Picasso, and so just notice here, style, according to the chapter anyway, the style was shaped by two major forces. So remember we talked about Cézanne a while ago. A lot of people think Cézanne is the greatest. Most people say Picasso is the greatest, but there are a lot of people who say Cézanne was the greatest. But then all this other, so Picasso really brings in other traditions, but he does it in a way that is not really obvious. Gauguin from before, remember from Gauguin and Van Gogh. Remember how they were living together for a little while, and he was around there when Van Gogh cuts his ear off, or probably Van Gogh cuts his ear off. Okay, Demoiselles d'Avignon, the maidens of this place in France. Okay, so here it's more important than the actual painting. Think about how you have to view this painting, or how he probably made this. And I will liken it to this. He changes the perception. Still got the bowl of fruit down here, the homage to the past. But now what we're going to do is imagine if you had a Polaroid camera. So not your iPhone. You have the old school type of camera that spits out pictures. And you were to go around a statue, for example. And you could start out in front of the statue, go to the side of the statue, go to behind the statue, and and you can have varying distances. Sometimes you could be really close, sometimes far away, and all that. So you would have all sorts of different takes on the statue, or pictures of the statue, but then you could lay all the pictures down. Well, okay. And then if you did that, you could start substituting heads, changing how bodies work. You could so you've kind of taken a 360 all the way around, included different depths, and then besides just changing heads, let's go to a completely different tradition. That's the kind of thing Picasso did. So when you first see it, when people first did it at the time, like, oh my God, what is going on here? This is something completely different. That over time they grew to love. So complexity, right, is the idea I'm getting at. So Picasso himself said, so he really loved these African masks. So the masks were not sculptures, not just sculptures. They were magical objects, intercessors against unknown, threatening spirits. And so it's not just in this painting; it's in other places that they show up. So he is synthesizing. He is starting to steal, as I call it, this art form, these creators, into his own creations, this style. Cubism gets really fragmented. Big picture, we're not really concerned with narrative content, meaning it's very difficult to create a story. So if I asked you to do a response that said, make a story about this, I guess you could, but you'd be really stressed too, because there's not the narrative elements there to make a story, right? Like, how do you get a basic plot, concern? How do you know what someone's individual concern is with a lot of these? So people were critical of this, saying that the art didn't really seem to do a whole lot. Some people were. And so they said, well, you can't do things like such as social commentary. And so to challenge that, Picasso made Guernica, which is a commentary on this bombing that happened in Spain a long time ago. And Picasso himself, of course, Spanish. And so this is a big mural, is what he made. So we keep trucking along, as it were. This shows up a little bit before World War II comes to a close. But here with futurism, in their minds, in this time period, right, what the future may end up looking like. Duchamp was a big artist here. This idea of the nude descending a staircase. It's very fragmented. As if you took so if that were a motion picture now, as we call it, remember when these come together, it's a bunch of still photos coming together. So that kind of fragmentation he captured. People loved this sort of thing at the time. Also, it went on tour. I don't remember if the chapter doesn't go into a great deal of this, but there was in a national carnival, as it were. And so it in this presentation that this was shown at, and people all over New York, for instance, would go to see it, and a bunch of other the modern works that were on tour at the same time. Matisse is not just a famous painter, but he's got some pretty good sculptures too. Some of these at the Dallas Museum of Art, if you head down here, this idea here that he's doing revolutionary things with colors, meaning they're not necessarily what you would expect. And then the rise of non-objective art. Mondrian is a big one here. There's some really good ones at both at the Dallas Museum of Art, and Kimball Art Museum has got a relatively famous one for this sort of thing. Anyway, if you head there, we're going to revisit him, and right now, I guess, search for the geometric order of nature. So this seems very odd to us. So this is a Mondrian. He has several like this, and he painted these with his hand. So that's these lines are not to a rule. In his mind, if you got down to the primary colors, this is his later style. He thought that you could view it for a while, and it would help rebalance you, get your psychiatric house, your spiritual house in order, that sort of thing. So he spent a great deal of time and effort creating different works like this where he was playing with different balances. So here, I mean, these are meant not to go all the way to the edge. For a reason you can research if you like. Other ones they do. Other ones instead they'll be different. He's experimenting with different patterns of colors. But the idea is you're supposed to sit in front of it for a little while. So not just to go there and go to the next one right by it. And this was really popular, this sort of thing, for a while as sculpture. You can see it in the same spirit of futurism. Expressionism. And Edward Munch is how you're supposed to say that. The Scream. I believe this one was actually stolen. And this was in an earlier World Fair at the time. And by the way, if you didn't hear about it, that's why we have the Fair Park at the time. I don't think it was this particular one that was going around. There's a really famous and somewhat long story about the Texan that got the Fair Park area to Dallas by essentially a really large fib, because it was going to end up going to Chicago, and he sort of rested. He changed them up where it was in that particular World's Fair was going to go. All right, the Dada movement, the most outrageous stuff. Just people will talk about this and especially talk badly about it. Just embrace absurdity, I guess is what I would say if you're into this sort of thing. Challenge what is art? Is it really more a perceptual thing, or is it this real high art form? And especially after the World War I, so before society seems to really implode for a while in World War II. World War I is a horrible war that no one really talks about anymore, and because of World War II after that. But this is where poison gas was about trench warfare. It started out with people on horseback, and it ended up with tanks, because it didn't work anymore. This is, in some people's mind, this is a defining edge of modernism. And after the war, think about it from the Europeans' perspective. This is the theater where this was fought. Well, how could there, if I'm pretending to be a European here, surely if there was a God would have stopped this craziness, right? So this was, they were talking about this in the World War I time, and then World War II came after that. So it's not this simple, but from the Europeans' perspective, you can see why they started to turn away from all those wonderful cathedrals that they built, and Protestantism arose there and all, and then they eventually said, well, this is not for us, essentially. We're not really buying this anymore. So if you were to find something, so in this case, a really famous recreation of the Mona Lisa, and you just put a mustache and a beard on. And what is that art? And is it really just about provoking the question to start out with about what is art in the first place? Can you do something later on, is it like grab a urinal and just put it in a different context? Surrealism. A lot of people love this sort of dreamlike stuff because, beyond reality, surrealism. Dali. with big surrealist here. Uh, Frida Kahlo was the first to kind of get away. Let's keep it real, as it were, in this context of modern art. She was in pain. She had some horrible stuff happen to her, and so that's what she chose to create art about. Had a really bad marriage to this guy was famous for a while. This Mexican muralist Diego Rivera. I think she has over time has the better reputation. Abstract expressionism. This is the stuff where people say, well, my kid could do that. It's like spaghetti on a wall. Here it's not really very colored spaghetti, but this is the idea. Jackson Pollock. And this guy was from Wyoming, and you can see many of his work in the Fort Worth Modern Museum. So if you were to go to Kimball, it's just right next door to there. You park, really you're going to park right in front of the Modern. There's a parking lot between both of them there. There's a relatively modern movie about this guy as well. So these are huge, most of his. So he is standing over, and he has the paint, and he's slapping it down in ways that are more orderly than it appears here. And most of his stuff, believe it or not, is very valuable. By the way, the guy who played him was the same guy who played in the lead role in The Abyss a long time ago. Ed something. I forget his last name right now. If you want to get a sense, there is an picture of the actual person, but that's how he'll paint in the movie. And there are a lot of these at the Fort Worth Modern Art Museum. These color filled paintings, except most of them aren't this color. Most of them think more ocean colors is what they have a lot more of. And it's a work surprisingly well when you're in front of one. It looks silly, I'm sure, on the screen here right now. But when you're in front of one of these, they do take on their own energy, or whatever you would like to call it. And early film. The book's just touching on the early stuff. And so when film first started going, it was just a bunch of clips they would say. Think of a whole bunch of photos that they would just slap right together. Much like if you were to have a sketchbook and then paint a slightly different sketch for the next one, and you would suggest motion. Well, that's how film got going, and it's walking you through this a little bit about how they created it, but also the subject matter. One of the first movies they made has his mother in it who's trying to save her infant, and the mother gets killed. Just awful. And that takes us to the end of this one.